Hello, everybody, and welcome to the development update for the end of the Chapter 1 side content milestone. Let me just shift to this. Hello. Last week was the big playtest week for Chapter 1 and its side content, and it went really well. Now, most of this update is going to be about the playtest, but during the week, I've also been working on a few assets. For like some of the game's factions-related content, which is going to be one of the focuses for the next milestone, starting next week. So I started working on art for the city's libraries, a recurring building type tied to the faction of Nabu, the god of secrets. Let me show you that. I was just showing it here, but yeah, there you go. So that's part of what I was working on last week between all the work related to the playtests. I've been working on this and some logic related to some of the other factions too. And figuring out a few details about them. But yeah, so this is kind of like the stuff I did on stream last week. But most of last week really was about the playtest. And so, yeah, let's go. Let's talk about how that playtest went. I have actually quite a bit to talk about here. So I made some notes. We've been working with Lionbridge to do this testing. 6 playtesters from there were working on it. Half of them had tested the game before, and the other half were testing it for the first time. And they did a wonderful job. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to show the backhand bug report system they're using. I don't know what kind of like non-disclosure agreement we might have that might be like in effect between them and Devolver. So I'll just play it safe, and I'll just be sort of paraphrasing how it went in general. So let me just pull this up here. I have a few notes. So first, let's just go over like generally like how the bug finding itself has gone, right? So they've playtested this for a week, from Monday to Friday. Now they found a few dozen issues or so over the week, and a lot of the issues were problems related to moving items between inventories and equipment and the like. I did some reprogramming and refactoring of how some of these item transfers work about a month ago, and unfortunately this has caused a lot of bugs down the line, as is sometimes the risk when you solve like lower level technical issues in a complex project like this. A lot of the issues we actually caught before the playtesting with like little tests here and there. But like, you know, a bunch of the more obscure moments where you exchange items we missed. But you know, that's just the nature of this sort of change, right? So maybe like 1/3 of the issues reported were caused by this, I think. Like a pretty significant portion of them. Since a lot of the playtesting here, a lot of the content that was being tested was little quests. And little quests very often involve exchanging items, right? So you bring back an item to an NPC, you give it to them, and if it's a kind of obscure NPC, it might have been using like the old code that I use for transferring items, that sort of thing. Now, another part was simply like scripting mistakes in new quests, so often from like dialogue trees that have typos somewhere. Dialogue tree logic where a conversation loops in on itself or turns to a dead end. Problems more common with dialogue trees that have a lot of branches, where I might not have actually tested all of them. This was another like good chunk of the issues reported. Maybe like 1 in 6 issues reported was something like that. The rest of it was miscellaneous issues like connections between two rooms being incorrect, quests not completing correctly under certain circumstances, quests having unclear or misleading instructions, visual glitches like objects not layering properly. Some of the problems arose from the use of special items like the Sword of Regicide, or there's some items that have that were not really working properly. Especially, like the artifacts, the rare items. Those are items that I'm very unlikely to test over the course of development because they show up at random. So when you play test, it probably doesn't appear. So, that's exactly the kind of thing that I would miss, and that, occasional playtesting from friends and stuff would miss, right? Another part of the playtesting last week was looking for feedback from the testers. I prepared a list of 26 questions for them, and they wrote answers to them at the end of the week based on their experience. Those questions were about the general vibe of the game and how it went, and things like the tutorials and the changes since last time and the new quests and all that. Again, like I said earlier, I don't know what kind of non-disclosure agreement might be in effect here, so I won't be quoting any of their responses here. I'll just read out my questions, and I'll paraphrase the general information I got from their answers. So the first questions I had asked were kind of like questions setting up context for the other answers that would follow, right? So I asked, is it the first time that you test the game? Had you played games like Malison before? All of that's just useful to know. Just to, gives context to the other answers below. So like I said, three of the testers had played the game before, had tested the game before in previous testing rounds, and 3 of them that was their first time testing it. So that's a nice little spread. Let's see. I have the sheet of answers here. There you go. Just looking at them there. Okay, that works. So for the returning testers, I asked some specific questions about whether they found the new tutorials of the game intrusive and what they thought of the changes to Chapter 1 overall. Overall, the reception there was very positive, except some points about the way I unlock equipment and inventory over the course of the prologue now. It used to be that as soon as you start the game, you got your entire, your inventory, your equipment was all there. And then, as I talked about in a previous update, I was thinking about moving unlocking these menus more progressively as you go, because the prologue itself is kind of simple enough that you don't really need to change equipment during it. And so it's probably best if the prologue just kind of focuses on the most basic elements. You're just exploring a cave, you find, you fight some monsters, and you don't have to worry too much about the menus yet, right? So I tried pushing the unlocking of equipment and all that later. That was pretty positive overall. But yes, some of the returning testers had noticed that they didn't have access to the larger stash and stuff. And so they one tester didn't like that. And I'm not sure yet if it's, sometimes it can be that you're just expecting something to be there and it's not, right? So it's I'm going to be sort of investigating that a bit. I think next time I do a playtest, I'll probably ask a more specific question. It was kind of I should have probably asked a more specific question about the inventory. I should have foreseen that might happen, right? So I think the next playtest round, I'll ask a specific question to ask, what did you think about not having an inventory in the prologue at the beginning? Did you find that annoying? Did you find that a problem? Or is it only really a problem if you expected there to be an inventory and it felt weird that there wasn't? Right? If you don't have that expectation, do you even notice that you don't have one until you're giving one, right? So that's what I'm thinking. So yeah, I need to. That's gonna be a question I ask next time. Because because it's a little difficult sometimes to differentiate, like, if someone, if a problem comes from an expectation that's not met, or if it's a problem that new players would actually have, right? So it's going to be important here to specify that, to find that out. Let's see what next. Oh yes, I asked for the returning players. I asked them if they found any of the new tutorials intrusive, and like I said, that basically nobody thought that they were intrusive, which is a relief, because that was something I was suspecting, because the game now has way more tutorials than before. There's way more times now where the game stops you and shows you how a menu works. They individually, those moments are shorter and they're more spaced out, and I think they're better paced than they were before. So I think it's an improvement. That's probably a big reason why this is still, like, people didn't really find them obtrusive. But yeah, I'm very relieved that basically nobody felt that they were obtrusive. So that's great. That might mean I might be able to add a little bit more to them too. I need to be careful, because if I push that, eventually it's going to cross that threshold into being obtrusive. But the fact nobody felt that they were intrusive is great news. So I might even add a little bit more detail to some of them if it feels like the players can take a little bit more info, right? Let's see, what else? I also asked if any of the menus felt confusing. And there was really one main, like, menu that people felt was confusing, which is the menu where you reform your party. Like a menu where you can choose, like, okay, this character, you go out of the party, you're replaced by this one. And that's fair enough. That menu really needs a facelift. It's awful right now. It's a really, really terrible menu. Let's scroll down their answers here. Oh yes, one question I asked is, when you get new equipment in the game, do you find yourself changing your equipment? Do you find yourself, like, experimenting with the new items? Or do you, like, are you avoiding the equipment menu, right? Because that was something that when Justin playtested, he brought that up, that was before I made the new changes to, like, how when the equipment menu is introduced and all that. He felt that when he found a bunch of new equipment items, he, like, dreaded it, because it meant going back into the pause menu, and now you have to, like, sort through all these items and compare them to find which one is the best, and it felt like a chore every time. So when he found new equipment, instead of feeling like it was a reward, it felt like a weird punishment. Now, I did make some changes. I'm introducing the equipment menu later, and I'm now introducing the equipment menu at a time where you have way less equipment to deal with. So I think that introduction is probably improving this. And so far, yeah, nobody felt really like they were avoiding the equipment menu. Of course, I got, like, kind of a range of answers here. Some people were, like, always constantly customizing their equipment, which is great. That's exactly what I want. Some people were like a little bit less, like, they were not. They say that nobody said that they were overwhelmed by the equipment menu, but only a few of them said that they were actively, like, experimenting all the time. So I think this seems like an improvement on that overall. Just introducing the equipment later at a better time, I think, was definitely a good change. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see if I can find some other ways to bring this. I think that Chapter 1 still has an issue with being just a little bit too, like, overwhelming the player, not with the menus, but with items. Right, like when I saw, like, their save games from, like, bug reports, I saw a lot of people had, like, a filled inventory with just a bunch of items, which is something I'm trying to fix. I'm trying to tweak the game's economy to not, like, fill characters' inventories with crap. And this is still something I'm struggling with. I'll need to try to tweak this a bit further. Chapter 1 is a lot better than it used to be regarding this, but it still needs some work there. I asked if they're using the quest log. So now I generally the people who had tested the game before didn't use the quest log quite as much because they were already more familiar with the quests, which makes sense. And the people who did not play it before, it was kind of like a variety of answers here. Some people say that they're not using it too much. Some people said that they did use it just to keep track of the quests they have done and to go back, like when they finish something, to remember, like, what else they can do. One person said that one issue they had with the quest map is that the map that it shows of the city is not very useful, which is true. That's kind of fair. The map of the quest log is not like a Super Metroid map. It's like kind of a drawn map of the city. It's much more of a Castlevania kind of map. It's a very abstract, like, drawn map that's meant to be, it's almost more meant to be like immersive than informative. Which, I mean, but another element is that the game is supposed to have an actual map, like a more Super Metroid style map, but it's not actually in the game. I didn't actually like make it unlockable yet in the game. So maybe if I put that back in, that actual map back in, or maybe if I made it possible to actually switch between those two types of maps in that menu, that might improve it. But yeah, that's something I'll need to think about. Another question I asked was, did you teach skills to your characters using the innate skills or the skill menu, or using books, or using skill trainers? And I got a variety of answers there. Some people, I think everyone was using skills, but the thing that was varying here, the main variable here is that they did not all use the same options, right? So, like, some people mostly use skill trainers. Some people mostly use books and the innate skills that your character can always learn. So I'll need to do a little bit more work there, so that, because the intention right now is for people to mostly use skill trainers and to use books when they find them. Yeah, so I'll need to work on that. I'll need to work on making sure that players are kind of pointed towards the characters that can teach them skills using, like, just through training. Yeah, the auto map is meant to be an unlock, kind of. The idea is that you would find map items, like map scrolls, and when you find your first one, it unlocks that option in the menu. I just didn't put that in yet. Yeah, I'm not sure yet how I want to implement the map. Right now, the mini map, the only way it appears is in the corner. It just forms as you explore. But yeah. Yes, that was for the skills. Then I asked, did you ever try putting characters in the back row? Did you even remember the back row thing at all before reading this question? Which, that was a problem before. I think before this update, basically in all previous playtests, I don't think anyone used the back row feature because it was almost like a hidden feature. There was no tutorials that mentioned it, and it was using like the formation option in the menu, and that was just one of like 12 options. And at first glance, it looked like that option was just to like move, like switch party members' order, while you were supposed to double click on a party member to shift it to back row, that's a really stupid thing, because that's something that comes from like basically all Final Fantasy games work like this, right? In Final Fantasy games, usually in classic ones at least, you can like select a character and then select them again. That pushes them to the back row. And I just like did that without really thinking about like, hey, most people today didn't play those games, and they won't, even if they did, they won't know that this also works here, right? So that made it like a weird secret feature. So I actually added a tutorial telling the players how this works. Yeah, that question was basically there to make sure, hey, did that tutorial hit? Did they actually learn that they can do that, and did they use it? And some of them actually remembered that there's a tutorial telling them how to do it. But they didn't always use this. So like one person said that they didn't really feel like it was giving them an advantage to use the back row. In part because like a lot of the characters you recruit don't really have like a ranged weapon or a long reach weapon, so you really kind of have to decide to give a character a focus on reach weapons or ranged weapons for that to be useful. One tester said that they used they use that mechanic with party members that use spears and other pole arms. That allows them to be more accurate with enemies fighting in close range, which is exactly one of the reasons to use it. I don't think I actually see anyone actually using ranged weapons yet, though. Also, one person just used the back row for the squishier characters, like Gladys in the prologue. And some people also said, several people said that they didn't feel it was really needed. That strategy, that action, they didn't feel like it was really necessary to survive in the prologue yet, in chapter 1. Here someone says that the enemies they don't really demanding, they're not hard enough that you need to use this kind of strategizing yet. You can just basically use your basic actions in chapter 1. And someone also said that they did use it. They did put someone in the back row when someone was in low health. And that's great, because that means the part of that tutorial that mentions that people in the back row are less likely to be targeted, that information hit with them, right? So they're like, oh, wait, my character's weak. I put him in the back row and they're going to live longer. Perfect. That's exactly how it works. So it's better than before, but that mechanic needs a little bit more work for people to sort of get the value of it and actually want to use it. One possibility could be here to make it that one of the early party members has a ranged weapon, right? Maybe uses a ranged weapon as like maybe I should give that to Levitt. Maybe Levitt should have like a sling as a secondary weapon and be skilled with it. That's an idea. Levitt could have the glass blowing pipe thing, and that's also kind of a reach weapon. So that's great, because that's a weapon that can kind of be used in close range and kind of be used in long range, as long as the target isn't too far away. And so I could give a sling to Levitt. That might actually be a great idea. Yeah, I'll make a note of that. Yeah, giving one of the first party members you recruit a ranged weapon. Yeah, that might be a really good idea to just sell the concept of the back row to players, and just give them an incentive to put at least someone in the back row. The main issue I'm foreseeing with this is that if Levitt is in the back row, that means that Levitt is not being used to take hits for the player. And that's one of the main reasons you want these early party members in the game, is so that they can kind of absorb some of the damage that would have hit the main character, right? So that's one reason to, But I still like it. I still think that would be an improvement overall. Him also having a glass blowing pipe means that he could also move to the front row. Maybe an element here would be actually, that's what I need to do. I need to add a tutorial to teach the player that to make them know that they can change rows in combat too. And changing rows in combat is great because it's a way to like change the reach of your character completely, like dynamically. It doesn't use up your turn, which is something they need to know as much as possible. And that's a great way to suddenly... That means Levitt, who has a sling in the back row, can just switch to the pipe and move to the front row and attack in the same turn. And that works, right? It doesn't even... If the pipe was in his main inventory, it doesn't even make him... Because usually when you change weapons, you become... you get like a status debuff. But yeah. The ambush feature? Yeah, the ambush feature, I mean, that's also something that needs like an actual tutorial. It doesn't have one. All right, let's move on here. All right, so next, let's see. So another question I asked is, did they switch weapons in combat, or did they ever pick specific weapons to fight specific enemies? Right. So this is all questions on like, is the tutorial right now, is it pushing people towards thinking strategically, or does the game feel like it doesn't really require that yet? That's always something I'm kind of worried about on this. So here I mostly got some good answers. I mostly got some like positive answers here. That people were generally switching weapons and not just sticking to one, which is great to hear. One person says that like on harder enemies, on like easier enemies, and that's kind of what I'd expect. On easier enemies, it's not as important which weapon you're using, but on harder enemies, you kind of have to be a bit more careful and switch weapons until you get something useful. And yeah, that's about what I'm expecting here. Someone said that they're trying to keep their party equipped with as many different types of weapons to have like flexibility, which is great. Also, yeah, someone especially, yeah, this, mostly this was just like positive answers here. Yeah, there you go. That was about, let's see now. As you played and decided skills, equipment, and party members to recruit, did you feel you've been mostly improvising? Or do you feel that you've been planning ahead? So that's again kind of about strategy, but it's more like, it's kind of a question about the tutorials again, right? The idea here is that do the tutorials at the start of the game give you enough information that you feel like you're forming a plan of how the game works, and you can, and here again, kind of a variety of answers. Some of them were more improvising. Some of them had like kind of a general plan, but in practice were mostly kind of improvising. Some of them felt a plan start to kind of form as they worked. This is kind of what you expect again. Like different players are going to come in here with different different levels of like sort of planning and involvement, and also existing knowledge of the genre is going to affect it. Other expectations of how much strategizing is needed for that kind of game is also going to affect it. Like if you've mostly played more straightforward RPGs before, you might not expect that the game like this needs a lot of strategizing, so you might just be improvising. While if you've played more trickier ones, you might sort of overplan, right? Like you might like expect that, oh wait, this might get hard later, so that's always how this works. Okay, next, the questions. We're about halfway through the questions now. The next questions were more about chapter 1 specifically instead of like general stuff. First one was, what is your general opinion of chapter 1 if you had to use very few words? And this was very positive. Very positive answers there. They seem to basically all like it. The experience with the genre, actually, the experience with the genre has been, now that's I didn't actually ask them. I didn't actually ask them if they had experience with the genre. I asked them, the specific question I asked was, like, this is like one of the early questions, was regardless of whether you tested this before, have you played other games like Malison before? And what is the game most like this one that you've played? And that doesn't actually mention what the game's genre is, because I also kind of wanted to know from this what they perceive to be the game's genre from having played it, right? And I mean, in general, it was basically like, you know, they basically answered like JRPGs, and also one person mentioned dungeon crawlers, Legend of Grimrock, which is great. That shows a bit more of the, you know, the, because, you know, Legend of Grimrock, obviously it's a bit more like CRPG like. But the new players, 2 of the 3 new players said that they never played a game like this, which is interesting. That shows it definitely feels new, and also that was informative for their answers, because if people who never played a game like this liked the tutorials and felt like they were able to actually play, that's great. That's excellent. That's like perfect. That's exactly what you want to hear. That someone who's never played a game like this was able to figure out and is enjoying it and is strategizing. That's great. That's exactly what I want to hear, right? Now, there's still, you have to be careful, because although this sounds like great news, since they're testers, it's literally their job to keep playing, right? And so that doesn't mean that someone who has never played a game like this would actually play it, right? Because obviously, if it's your job to play it, then even if you feel resistance at first, you're gonna keep playing because it's literally your job, right? While someone who doesn't necessarily who just like played the game, if they feel some resistance at first, some friction in getting into it, they might just refund it and play something else, right? So I can't, you know, take this as just a victory. All right, ship it, boys. You know, it's more complicated than that, but it's still really good news. That's something you definitely want to hear. But yeah, just need to be careful not to celebrate, not to celebrate too quickly. But yes, so for the general opinion on chapter 1, that was very positive. That's like one of the most positive answers. Basically everything I wanted to read was the answer there, you know. Well thought out, great fun, pleasant to explore, like they really quite liked it. So that's great. In comparison, some of the earlier in comparison to that, some of the earlier playtests when I asked similar questions were way more negative, right? Like some of the really early playtests, when the game was like had way less, like a lot of the game's design was different early on. There was a lot more combat. The combat was a lot more awkward. There was a lot more, like the pacing of the game was much worse. There were like way too many locked items. Like one of the early problems was there were like a lot of locked doors, and the locked doors everywhere just kept stopping your progress. So exploring was frustrating. Like there were a lot of problems like this. And yeah, like the first review, the first like feedback I got was a lot more negative. And here it's basically just glowing across the board. So yeah, definitely I can feel there's a big like improvement going on with how the game's getting received by testers. Okay, so now next question I was asking was, what is your opinion about the freedom and restrictiveness of Chapter 1? Does it feel like you're following a preset path, or does it feel like you're exploring on your own? And here again, exactly I got the answers I'm looking for. You know? Exactly what I'm looking for here. That basically they felt that the game was somewhat simple, somewhat like basic exploration wise, until they reach King Street, which is when suddenly it feels like the game's opening up and now you have big freedom about what to do next. Exactly what I want to hear here. Because, and there's kind of a specific thing here, is that Chapter 1 before King Street already has a lot to do. There's a lot of things to explore, but the exploration options before King Street are hidden. They're not things that like first time players are going to find. And so it's meant to be like, if you've already played the game, then you know that Chapter 1, the first half of Chapter 1, actually has a bunch of options for you to do things differently. So it makes replaying the game more fun, but on your first time through, it's not overwhelming because it looks straightforward. That's exactly what I want for Chapter 1. The first half, I want it to actually have a bunch of options, but they're all hidden. And to most players, it seems straightforward until you reach the halfway point, and that's when the game kind of lets you loose, right? So yeah, exactly what I want there. That's perfect. Yeah, I'm very, very happy about that answer. Okay, next one. This one is kind of like the opposite question. That was like the next question was like, in case some people felt overwhelmed in Chapter 1, the next question was kind of for them to expound on it. So it was, does it feel like you're overwhelmed with options? Like there is a lack of direction? You don't know where you're meant to go? That's something I'm always worried about, especially yeah, like when you hit King Street, and especially with all the new stuff that's been added, all of the new side content that's been added recently around King Street, I was worried that this would feel overwhelming now. There's a lot more NPCs. A lot of them have quests. The quests kind of send you all around. There's a lot more to explore in the slums, like the dark, spooky, cursed slums. Like there's a lot more to do, so I was worried that this might be overwhelming. And here, there was a little bit of that. There was a little bit of overwhelm, but it was fairly mild, which I think is fine. I might need to be careful a bit with like maybe I should like reframe or move some of the characters. Like some of the characters that have a lot of quests, maybe I should move them a little bit out of the way so that it doesn't it doesn't feel like you're assaulted by those options as soon as you step into King Street, right? So I might need to tweak that a little bit. I don't want to remove the content, but just reframing it, just shuffling it, just setting it aside so that the people most interested in that side content are the most likely to find it. And everyone else is going to be more like unburdened by it, right? That's like the ideal there. So yeah, here let me go over sort of like the so someone here doesn't feel overwhelmed with the amount of options. On the contrary, so one here felt it was basically perfect. Again, I'm trying not to read because again, I'm not sure what kind of like agreements, like NDAs, might be going on. So I'm trying to just paraphrase things. Oh yes, actually, one person mentioned that the King's Pub might be a point where things feel a bit overwhelming. And, you know, it might be true. Like, basically, one person said, and this was a returning player, too. So, if, like, they had played the game before, so if they felt overwhelmed by a point, that's something I need to pay special attention to. Because they would be more resistant to being overwhelmed, right? So that's something to pay special attention to in this case, I think. That, yeah, like, they felt that that the King Street pub might have, like, too many NPCs to interact with. There might be, they felt basically they got a bit bored with all the talking, and they craved, they wanted to do more. And yeah, I'll need to think about this. Maybe it might be worth it to move one or two NPCs out of the King's Pub. I'll need to think about that. It might be a good idea to just move things around a bit. One person seems like their answers, they were not personally overwhelmed by the stuff around King Street, but felt like some people might be. Which, I mean, that's a valid comment. One person actually said, yeah, felt a bit overwhelmed. There's a lot of directions where the player can go, but felt that they actually enjoyed that part. That they felt that this level of overwhelming, having so many options, was like a core part of the game. And so they enjoyed it, right? So it's not maybe necessarily overwhelmed, but maybe like an unexpected amount of like freedom with options, but maybe didn't actually like I guess they didn't feel paralyzed by the options, but they felt, you know, it had an impact, I guess, that there were a lot of options. And yeah, the others said basically didn't feel that the variety of options might be overwhelming, but they didn't feel lost necessarily. And yeah, that's to me, that's like the sweet spot, right? If you feel a little overwhelmed but not lost, that's good, I think. As long as you don't feel lost. And I think it's like there's two parts of that. There's two parts of this, of making that work, I think. On one hand is just the sheer number of options, and on the other hand is having a more clear main goal. And making sure that that main goal is always, like, visible. It's always obvious. While all of these options, so that if you feel overwhelmed by those options, you can just default to the main goal. And that's sort of, you know, it's like that main goal is like something in the horizon that you're using as like your orientation point. You know, I don't know, and you know, well, you know, when you're using a map and a compass, you know, it's what you're using to, you know, to find true north. It's a compass. It's what's the term? It's your lighthouse, right? The main goal needs to be the lighthouse that you use as you navigate the game's content. That's how I see it. Let's see. Next question is... the next question was, if you feel overwhelmed with options, could you say when in the chapter that feeling was the strongest? And basically, those that felt that they were a bit overwhelmed at times, it was like either King Street or King's Pub, or some people just said they didn't really feel like it was anywhere in particular. One person actually had a more detailed question there. Okay. So, yes, let me see. Okay, yes. So, yes, one... Oh, actually, one person got lost in the sewers, which that's another thing I need to handle. The goddamn sewers. They are such a great way to get lost early on. If you end up in the sewers early, that can spell trouble, because the sewers are just a nightmare maze. they're like the worst place to be. Well, maybe not anymore, but they're one of the worst place to be in the game, the sewers. Now, the entrance to the sewers is a lot harder to get to now. It used to be way easier to get there, and now I actually made it much harder to get there. You need to like follow a bunch of quests. You need to go through like really scary locations now to actually reach the early entrance to the sewers. So, you need to go out of your way to access them now. But even then, I still need to give you some way to get out of them if you end up there early, right? That is important. I need to do that. I can't set that aside, you know. Okay, let's see. Next one was do you feel, so this is kind of related. Did you feel like exploring off the beaten path has been rewarding in the game so far? Do you feel like it's been worth it? Do you feel like what you've played of the game so far makes you want to keep exploring off the beaten path in the next chapters, or were you feeling like if you kept playing, you would stick more to like the core? And yes, in general, people have felt that the exploration is actually rewarded. It's not. They don't tend to be disappointed by the stuff they do find. One person said that they felt a bit disappointed in some cases. Some people felt that they were some people felt that sometimes it felt like it wasn't worth it, and sometimes it felt rewarded. In general, people feel like it was worth it exploring, but had a few moments of disappointments. So it's not perfect there. Sometimes things are a little some people were just talking about how like they enjoyed when they've been off the beaten path for so long that they're not sure how to get back, and that actually has a little like thrill of exploring, that they feel like they're off in the ocean, like they don't even like, they know that they're not where they're supposed to be, and it feels like they're getting further and farther away from the main road of the game, and feel like there's kind of this threat because they don't know where the closest save point is. And, that's great. Again, exactly what I want when people, as the feeling I want people to have when they're really far from the main path. So that's pretty great. This one. What kinds of things have you found the most interesting or satisfying to find when exploring? And what kinds of things have you found disappointing, right? So that's basically trying to know like the kinds of rewards that people tend to enjoy in the game so far, and the kinds of things that have been disappointing. And basically like it's kind of what you expect here. The finding artifacts, like rare art, like unique artifacts. Of course, finding scrap, finding junk, right? Obviously, that would have been. Some people are particularly frustrated by scrap, not just because it's worthless, but also because it clutters the inventory. So it feels like an actual punishment and not just the lack of a reward. Which, yeah, that's fair. Some people found really like just finding overpowered weapons. One person randomly found the genie lamp, which is a unique artifact that has a minuscule chance of spawning into any given treasure chest you open. Any given container has like a tiny, tiny chance to spawn a tier 0 artifact, right? The tier 0 artifacts are these super rare items. They're all unique. Only one of each can appear in the game. And any container has a tiny, tiny chance of spawning one of these. And one character got the genie lamp, and it saved his life. It saved their life. So that's great. That's pretty great. That's a great little storytelling. Little, how you call that? Spontaneous bit of storytelling from mechanics. And one person actually, what they appreciated the most was like finding pieces of lore and like fun NPCs, which I also agree. I actually also agree that this tends to be the best. Like finding a weird character, a weird, funny, or scary character, tends to be the most satisfying kind of reward. Yeah, yeah, I agree. That's also kind of how I feel about these things. Um, Yeah, actually, more than one person mentioned NPCs as like a more interesting reward than items. And yeah, that's yeah. Um. Oh, and one person actually mentioned that their favorite thing that they found while exploring was Helen, the really scary person, the really scary woman in the jail that you can rescue and just get into your party, who looks like fucking terrifying. And that's exactly it, right? That kind of weird encounter, and then oh wait, she's a party member. Oh no, yeah, that's exactly what I want. Yep. Um. So the next question was: so how difficult or easy do you feel Chapter One has been so far? Have there been any parts that you felt was either too trivial or too difficult? Now, of course, this is definitely one of the questions where whether someone's played the game before or tested the game before has a big impact, right? Um, so yeah, like mostly the people that had tested the game before didn't find this too difficult. And every once in a while, when there is an enemy that's difficult, you can just leave them for later. You can just run, and yeah, basically that's what you're meant to do. Um, and I think, yeah, people generally feel like the difficulty of Chapter 1 is about right. Um, yeah. There's been some people mentioned things that were more like problems they encountered, like for instance, there's some, like for instance, like if you explore a lot, you can sometimes find quest items, but you might not realize they're quest items, and you might discard or sell them, and then later you realize, wait, someone's looking for that, and I'm not actually sure what to do about that. I'm not actually sure. Maybe I should just change their description so that it's more obvious that it's like that this belongs to someone. Like you can find a ukulele hidden in the undercroft of the wall of the outer wall of the city. There's like there's just a random ukulele like against a wall somewhere. And if you don't have a bard, that's a useless item to you. That's just an item that a bard can use to like give a buff to your party members. So that's an item a lot of people would sell, but there's a specific guard in the game that's looking for it. So I could probably just change that description to say like, property of, I don't know what, I forget the guard's name. And yeah, something like that. Just little bits of description that might help. No, I want them to be sellable. I don't want to make some items not sellable because, like, I want you deciding to sell it instead of giving it to the guard is like a valid thing to decide, right? Like, it might be way more worthwhile to sell and just get some gold for it than to give it to the guard who doesn't even give you a reward for it, right? So I just don't want. I just want to avoid people selling it from just not realizing this could be useful, right? But I do want them to be able to decide to sell it. So yeah, just making it a bit more clear that this might be an important ukulele. That would probably do the trick. Let's see. Wasn't there more specific comments about the difficulty? Yeah, not very difficult. Was able to kill most of the bosses, clear most of the locations. The amount of gear seems to make you strong enough to be able to deal with basically everything. The biggest problems, yeah, actually, that's one thing. Right now, the biggest difficulty spike is actually at the very start of Chapter 1, when you still just have one party member. And at this point, yeah, it's true. One of the hardest fights in Chapter 1 is in the first street, and you can fight it right away. It's that, Migraine Manfred, right? The guy who's got an entire insect growing out of his head. And yeah, that's a nasty encounter. If you try to fight this guy when you don't have like a full party, he kicks your ass. Of course, that's on purpose. That's meant to like put the fear of God into you early on, right? Yep. Yeah, I think basically everyone's in agreement that right now the game is at its hardest at the start of Chapter 1. And part of that is definitely because of the some of the problems with the balance of just the sheer amount of items you get early on. If I rebalance the game to give you a bit less equipment, that might tweak this, that might make the difficulty a bit more even across the chapter, because you just won't have so much gear and so much stuff that everyone can be like fully equipped. Yeah, basically, as soon as you have some companions recruited, the game's difficulty goes way, way down. Yeah. Yeah, that's basically the general feeling there. Right, so what do you think of, so that's the next question. What do you think of the resource management aspect in Chapter 1? Did you have to be careful about your resources at all, and did you ever run out of something important? Let's see. So plenty of resources, never really ran out of anything, was overloaded with stuff, was encumbered all the time. With proper exploring, the players got plenty of stuff. Inventory was full. So yeah, this is probably the biggest issue here, and like I mentioned it before, right? Chapter 1 gives you way too much stuff. Your inventory is cluttered really quickly. And that is always going to be a tricky problem with this game. That is going to be a problem across the entire game, I think. That you end up with a lot of clutter in your inventory, a lot of stuff. And I honestly am not sure how much I can actually fix that. That's a really tricky problem, because as soon as a game has a lot of different places you can go to, right? As soon as a game has a lot of places to go to, then the more you explore, the more crap you end up with, right? And there's no easy solution to this other than like making items dynamic. So if you explore more, places have fewer items, but that sucks. No one wants that. I mean, if you do it really subtle, people don't notice it, and people, and that can work, but I don't want to do that. Resident Evil 4 does that. And that works wonderfully. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to do that. The game, this game is way more exploration focused than Resident Evil 4 is too. So I'm not even sure I could do it. I could only do it so much, But yeah, that's a problem I need to contend with. I need to balance. This game needs item balancing. Like, the item balancing needs to be on point. Now, one element I could try to do for item balancing, and this is something that hasn't really been introduced in the game yet, is using the progress of time in the game to add extra challenges, to add extra monsters, right? That if you explore one area a lot, a new monster shows up and kicks your ass. That's one way to balance it, because then fighting this monster obviously is going to cost you resources. But at the same time, what's great about that approach is that you don't... when a new monster shows up and is dangerous and wants to fight you, it doesn't feel like a punishment. It feels like a reward, right? At least to me, it does. It feels like extra content. It feels like, ooh, new things happened. Cool, right? even if it's not a good thing for you from your perspective, it's actually a reward, but it's a reward that makes the game, that kind of like counterbalances having explored much. So that might be at least part of the answer here, both reducing the amount of items you find and also adding some extra monsters that show up if you explore the game a lot. If you explore very thoroughly, adding new monsters that just appear in the middle of the street past a certain point of the game, like after you've explored a number of rooms, like a big demon shows up in the middle of that street or that street. Or maybe like bandits show up to kick your ass. I don't know. I think that would be part of the answer, part of the solution here. Next question. It's more general questions. How would you describe the atmosphere of the game in the prologue and in chapter 1? And yeah, good. I just wanted to have just a general vibe here. What's the vibe of the game right now? I wanted to know if anyone would feel that it's goofy. You know? I wanted to know what the general like temperature is for what people just generally feel the game's atmosphere is. Because I have been a little worried in the past that the game feels too goofy. A little. And I am very pleased to see not the word goofy did not even show up once. Curious, spooky, climactic, enigmatic, atmospheric, intriguing, gloomy, curious, bizarre, mysterious. Great. That's what I want. Exactly. Great. And also, one person mentioned that they liked that, like, it was like mostly atmospheric, but with little jokes that lightened the mood a bit. Perfect. Yes. Great. Also, then I was a bit more direct on the next question. A bit more direct. Literally asked, are there any specific moments that you found scary? And any scares that you feel fell flat? Any moment clearly that was supposed to be scary that didn't work, right? One person mentions Helen, and also almost everyone mentioned like the areas of profound darkness, like the West Slums and the Barbican basement. I think basically everyone mentions that, which is great. That's supposed to be the scariest part of chapter 1, so that's great. The atmosphere is working there. It's meant to be scary enough that people don't want to go there. And I think that has worked. I think people in the past have commented that they did not explore that place because it seemed no. They walk in there and all the warnings, all the red flags are deployed. And that's perfect. That's what I want, right? So yeah, deep darkness. Also, some of the monster enemy sprites at close range were not exactly scary, but sometimes gave little chills. It's good. It's good. Deep darkness made you feel cautious about what happens next. Someone mentioned Wellard transforming. That is a startling bit, yes. The noises in the cobbler's workshop. The cobbler's workshop is this workshop early on in the game where you hear someone walking around. Now, if you encounter the cobbler, you find that he's got like a really sketchy, like really goofy monster sprite where he looks like a big bug with too many legs wearing clogs. It actually looks really stupid, but you know, the clogs are very stupid. It's a very stupid version of that concept, but I kind of like it. Actually, it mentioned like the noises in the darkness and yes, the moment before. So that person actually mentioned the moment before as working there, so that's great. Yes, all the places surrounded by darkness. Again, someone else mentioning that. Great. Also, the main thing that seems to be scary is the appearance of enemies. Enemies are creepy. Yeah, sure. One person here mentioned Zephrine being a bit disappointed. So that's interesting. I'll need to look into that. I actually really like what Zephrine looks like. But someone felt like the sound that Zephrine makes kind of really pumped up their expectation for what Zephrine would actually look like. And then when they got into Zephrine's room and saw what horrible creature she had become, they were actually like, it was actually not as intense as the sound was selling it. Webcam view. But yeah, so in general, this was pretty positive. Just Zephrine, maybe someone felt like she was a little underwhelming after the build up to her. She's got quite a bit of build up. So yeah, it does. You need a lot of work to get to something satisfying from that. Next question. We're almost done. Only 4 questions left. Any specific parts of chapter 1 that you found funny? Any funny moment that you think didn't work? Actually, almost everyone mentioned Rafalgi, the little tree stump elf, as being very fun, as being a very funny character. So that's great. I think 3 people mentioned Rafalgi. Yeah, we all love Rafalgi. The little rotting tree stump. One person mentioned the sausage demon. But that's not in chapter 1. So this is a returning tester who remembers the sausage demon that Critter designed from chapter 4. Yeah, the talking tree stump, intriguing, weird, and funny. Yeah, the first conversation with Rafalgi were very funny. Someone mentions the spider pretending to be a human. That's my personal favorite of the characters so far, for sure. That's Donald. We all love Donald. Donald is a great example of a good reward for exploring, right? Finding the spider's lair takes a lot of exploring. Like, the spider's lair has a very obfuscated entrance. Also, this was from someone who had not tested the game before. So this is someone who just found that location in their first time playing. So that's pretty good too. And also, 2 different people mentioned one of the new guards added. The guard that's really drunk in the pub and lost his sword. So 2 different people mentioned that guy, Morty. Next question. What recruitable characters have you liked or disliked so far? So we got Helen, Mallory, Donovan. Actually, someone disliked Donovan. Someone didn't like Donovan's attitude, though they felt that it fits the character. It's just not. They just don't like that type of character. Yes, Levitt and Mallory, Gladys. I have not noticed a Leslie fan, but Leslie doesn't have a lot of writing so far. Leslie, actually, like Leslie, Mallory, and Donovan all are basically missing their their characterization, really, other than the initial meeting, right? So they don't really have their their actual character building quests yet, which is actually what I'm working on the next milestone is also going to include giving them their quests. I think Donovan I think a lot of people are gonna like Donovan after he changes his tune. I think a lot of people I think a lot of people are gonna grow to like Donovan when they learn what can happen with him. Uh, Donovan's a grower. Uh, he grows on you, is what I mean. Oh, someone really liked Levitt a lot. Um, someone really liked Levitt a lot. Someone liked Levitt a lot as like the first character you meet in chapter 1. Um, yeah, actually, several people mentioned Levitt. Someone thought that the thought of a jumpy glass blower in a city full of monsters is just very funny. Sure. Um, Also, what non-recruitable characters have you liked or disliked so far? People mention Ambrose, the junk trading lizard man, the salamander looking kobold. Um, Someone didn't like Scotty because she gives very little gold for doing hard work, and she doesn't seem grateful. Yeah, Scotty's a bit yeah, she's very dismissive for sure. Um, yeah, people bringing up Rafalgi again, Ambrose. Actually, some people are now. This is something I'm also really pleased by. Um, Ambrose, the junk. No, not junkie, junk. Trader. He buys and sells junk. Um, so that's actually interesting. One person felt that Ambrose is now the main shopkeeper in chapter 1. That's not really the intention, but the change that I made where he now actually walks around with the wheelbarrow, he's much more like visible, actually does make him feel like he's like the main shopkeeper. Sorry, or at least an important shopkeeper. So I think just giving him just giving a little facelift to his appearance and how he walks around, that has helped a lot with that character. He feels like way more important now. Yeah, and he's really like one of the main first traders that you like interact with that can just buy all of your crap. Like his entire existence is all meant to help you reduce clutter. He literally exists for the purpose of getting you to get rid of the useless garbage you carry around. So making him likable is important. You should be as likable as possible, right? Uh, so yeah, I think I'll try to work on making him even more likable, if possible. Like people need to sell their crap. They have way too much. They're walking around with like 200 items in their inventory that has a max of 64. It's unreal. Yeah, it's again. I keep talking about that. I keep harping on it, but inventory clutter really is like the core design problem the game has right now. And yeah, it needs a multi-factor approach to solve. Yeah, and Ambrose is definitely a key part of that. I need to literally like reward players for selling their crap to him. Like players need to actually be rewarded for it. you know? Like there needs to be almost like like giving him trash is like a fucking gachapon. Like I need to use all of the game design dirty tricks to trick them into getting rid of their useless junk, you know? Yeah. Yeah, he's got to exactly. I need to use all the tricks to coerce them, to trick them, using all the evil little tricks in the book to get rid of their garbage. Exactly. um Oh yeah, so yeah, what non-recruitable characters you liked? Yes, Refalgi. Yeah, basically that. Also, and the final question I asked. Yes, loyalty card. That's yes, definitely. Yeah, something like that. So, and the final question: what is the most memorable part of Chapter One? And a lot of people, a lot of people answered that entering the King's Pub for the first time was the most memorable part of Chapter 1. I love that. That's great. That means because I redesigned the King's Pub to be more to have a more warm atmosphere, and I love that a lot of people answered this. Because yeah, like it was really cold and kind of a boring location before. Now just that new atmosphere, all those characters, all those NPCs drinking, and the background music and the warm roaring fireplace, all of that really worked. That really makes an impact when people enter. Um, yeah, I mean the old one was just a really basic room with a bunch of NPCs. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. So a lot of people just mention it. Like that's just where they go to, where their mind goes to for the most memorable part. Yeah. Player immediately feels a homely atmosphere, nice change from the rest of the chapter. Um, the first safe zone where the player feels safe. Memorable thing, pleasantly created, amazing atmosphere where I could imagine sitting there myself and ordering something. That's great. That's great. The fact that they like this is a very general question, you know? I didn't like point them in any direction here. And a lot of people brought that up. Um half of them, half or four? Oh, three. Okay, well, half of them you went to that. Yeah. Of course. Another one mentioned fighting the pterodactyl monsters at the top of the tower. Um, yeah, and the fact that you can save like some of the party members that you were with in the prologue there, and that you can also get an egg and that might hatch in a companion or maybe an enemy. Like someone really enjoyed that moment of getting um at the top of the tower. Let's see. There's two more answers there. Uh someone really enjoyed the violin maker. How depressing that was. Yeah, someone really enjoyed just like they felt like they were just every step of that quest, the violin maker situation just keeps getting worse, and they felt powerless to help. And then when you return to her for to get the violin, like they expected that they would probably have to kill her, and then even though they expected, they were still sad. Yeah, that's there you go. That's memorable. And also, someone mentioned the fight with the cricket knight atop the wall between the towers, and they felt that that was a really good moment. Yeah, great, great, great. So yeah, overall, yeah, the answers to the questions I got super good. Yeah, it's informative. I mean, it's a lot of the worries I had about a lot of the new content are assuaged by this. It seems like there's not too much. It's maybe a little overwhelming, so I need to be careful about any additions here. This seems like a good number, good just amount of quests. So I need to be careful about not. It seems like a good balance of it. The difficulty needs tweaking. The items need tweaking. That is still the biggest problem, and I suspect it's going to be the bigger. I suspect too many items and inventory clutter is always going to be like one of the main issues to deal with throughout the entire project. Making sure that the balance of items is right, the balance of difficulty, the number of things that just takes items away. reasons to get rid of items, reasons to have to sell, opportunities to sell items, all of that's going to be just a balancing act I need to always worry about throughout the whole thing. But yeah, that was super informative, super good. And also, like, other than that, of course, the actual playtesting and bug finding was also great. The game already feels like way more stable after all of this development work with making all these quests and stuff. But yeah. So, yeah, very eventful week last week, very productive. So, now let's talk about the road ahead. So, those last 2 months were all about improving Chapter 1, adding quests to Chapter 1, adding all of the side contents, all the NPCs that were missing, all of this stuff. And yeah, that basically like concludes this milestone of the game's development. The next milestone is basically the same thing, but for Chapter 2. Now, Chapter 2 is a very different beast from Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is meant to be a moment where the game opens even more. The first half of Chapter 2 kind of mirrors the first half of Chapter 1. Like, the early Chapter 2 is meant to, again, be a little bit more restrictive. It's kind of like, it's like after Chapter 1's more open nature with all the NPCs, you enter Chapter 2, and now you're kind of back to a more straightforward chapter for a little bit. Because a lot of your options are kind of sealed for you. They're kind of like inaccessible. So for the most part, the early Chapter 2, is all about this sort of an initial trek through a kind of a specific path that takes you on a little path through Chapter 2, and then through the slums of the East slums instead of the West slums you've been to before, and then sort of loops you back into King Street, and then the chapter opens up, and that's when you have way more options than before. This is the most open that the game gets, sort of at the middle section of Chapter 2. That's when there's like this huge dungeon you can go to, or you can skip that dungeon entirely, and there's other ways to go through it. So this is the moment the game becomes the most open. And I need to be very careful about that moment, right? Because that's the moment where the player is probably the most likely to feel lost in the entire game. So I'll need to be super careful about how that moment happens. There's like a moment where, because Chapter 2 is the point where the game splits into 3 giant paths, right? And that's important. This is the moment where the game goes from having one like simple chapter sort of progression to splitting into 3 main paths, because then Chapter 3 is essentially 3 mini chapters stuck together depending on how you ended Chapter 2, right? Chapter 3, depending on how you ended Chapter 2, is in 3 completely different locations that have some connections together, but you need to work to actually travel to the other bit. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting, really tricky to make that point work. If I mess it up, people are going to get lost. They're not going to even know that there's now 3 options for where to go, right? That's a big risk. There's a big risk that when people get to that, they just wonder which is like, where are they supposed to go, right? They're going to think like, what is the one path where I'm meant to go? Which of all of these possibilities is the main path and which is like side paths? There's 3 main paths here. That's tricky to convey to the player without literally like breaking the fourth wall and telling them. So yeah, that's going to be tricky. One possibility, one approach here, and that's kind of where I'm leaning, but one possibility here is to actually still act like there's one main path and work on that as, as sort of the approach to frame that path versus all the side content. And that has been kind of my approach so far, because those 3 different paths, I've been mostly just working on one of them. So focusing on that one path as if it was the main path just has made sense so far, right? Yeah. Yes and no on Soundwell. Like, some of the ways through to the different paths are tied to the factions, but not like rigidly tied to the factions, right? Like, for instance, the main path, if you're following sort of like the holy faction, like if you're following either Odin or Sekhmet, both of those gives you early access to a little chapel in the game. And that chapel, if you finish that quest line, is like an alternate path that leads you to the west, to the west section, and to the west sort of part of chapter 3, right? So it's like, if you go that route, you're kind of like pushed in that direction, and there's like an easier way to go that way, right? But you can enter the chapel and kill everyone inside too, So entering the chapel doesn't actually mean you side with them. So it's complicated. There's even a way to betray them, like, really badly too. There's a way to betray them, like, horribly. So yeah. So like I said, it's complicated. And also, another thing is, if you go with the Thieves Guild faction, the Thieves Guild is a really important part that's missing in Chapter 2 right now. And it's going to be a big segment of this. And the Thieves Guild pushes you to the east section, kind of the chapter. But it's not rigidly pushing you that way. But there's a bunch of reasons to explore east when you're in the Thieves Guild. But you can very much still progress west and then just do side quest east, right? So, yeah. So there is kind of a relationship between the faction you choose and where you go, but none of it is forced. It's just sort of nudging you in one way or the other a bit. But yeah, so yeah, that's going to be the way forward. It's going to take a lot of planning. I'm going to need to really like sort out like a priority list for all of these things. All of these side quests, all of that missing content needs to be sort of like prioritized so I know where to work on first. What are the things that I'm considering like primary secondary content? Which is kind of funny, but that's how it is, right? Out of all of the secondary content, which of the parts that need to be in there for this milestone? What are the parts that I really want to be in there but doesn't necessarily need to be? The game would survive without it for now. I could just be a bit later. What parts are a bit more, what parts are a bit more secondary, tertiary, it's complicated. So yeah, I'll need to organize this. I'll need to have a big old priority list to make sure the most important stuff is done first. I'm not even sure how exactly I want to prioritize all of that. Like, for instance, the Thieves Guild. Should the Thieves Guild be like the first thing I work on? Because it is the biggest chunk missing. But it's also like, it's the biggest chunk missing, and it's like the most Chapter 2 specific chunk of content missing too. It's not really missing, it's all there, it just doesn't have anything to do in it. So like, you can actually go to the Thieves Guild right now in the current build of the game. It's just a bunch of NPCs that have like nothing to say, Some of them have like just like generic text, and you can just like fight or kill them, and you can loot the place. So you can essentially treat it as a dungeon right now. You can treat it as just like a hostile location with loot, and it works kind of like that. And that's actually an intention. It's actually part of the intention that this works both as sort of a location for a faction and a bunch of quests, and also works as a dungeon to go through, and then there's a boss at the end, right? It's kind of have, which I don't think is that uncommon. I think I've seen like several games have an area that's like, that both acts as like a faction location and also like a dungeon with a boss. I don't think that's particularly unique in CRPGs. I think I've seen that before. But yeah, so that's definitely a big segment, and I'll need to work on that. But another element that might take precedence over the Thieves Guild is the general stuff about factions, right? So the game has multiple factions, and you can only join, well, you can technically kind of join all of them, or at least several of them, but there's only one that you can like lock yourself into. There's only one that you can receive the mark from. And the mark that you receive, it's really always tied to either a god or a demon. So a god or a demon can essentially give you its mark. And when you receive a mark from one of these things, it gives you kind of a modifier for your main character's class. It's kind of like in a lot of roguelikes when you have a god, like it might not necessarily change your character completely, but it gives you some extra powers or some extra abilities that can mix well or not so well with the build that you're doing so far for your character, or maybe it just mixes well with your whole party or the general strategy you're doing. And so all of those factions kind of have these ways that they interact with your party composition and the general thing you're doing in the game. And Chapter 2 is kind of supposed to be when you make that decision about which faction you want your character to join. Basically, which god you want your character to worship in the game. That's essentially it. And there's a bunch of them. And there's a few of them that are meant to be something you can join in Chapter 1, actually. But the intention is that most people choose one of those factions in Chapter 2. But in Chapter 1, if you explore a lot, you have some options to join some of these factions early. And joining one of those factions early can actually affect Chapter 2 a bit by giving you like an early solution to certain things. Like I said earlier, you can enter the church on Chapter 2. You can enter the church on Chapter 2 early if you have the mark of Sekhmet, or possibly also the mark of Odin. That might also work there. It would be mostly Sekhmet. Yes, it is clear when you're joining a faction. You're not accidentally joining one. You could accidentally be doing quests that support a faction, but receiving the mark is a very explicit moment. It's like, it's like you have to demand a mark. You have to like ask for it, and then you receive it, and it's a whole thing. There's usually going to be some sort of challenge or some sort of quest you need to do to prove that you're worthy of it. It's like a thing. It's not something that's done lightly. Although it might be funny to have a faction that just like goes like, hey, that you got, and then push, you receive the mark of, I don't know, Satan or whatever, and now you're stuck with it, and now your character has a very specific set of abilities all of a sudden. That would be funny, but that's not how it works right now. But yes, so that the stuff related to the factions could be the first priority, the first stuff I want to work on for Chapter 2. in part because it ties into a lot of stuff, and so it might be easier to work on the other side content if that stuff is already there. And also because a lot of this faction stuff is actually going to be in Chapter 1. And I'm still working on Chapter 1 stuff. Mostly right now I'm just fixing bugs from things that they report, that the playtesting reported. But I'm still, in the spirit of Chapter 1. And so if some of those factions actually have early ways of joining them back in Chapter 1, it might be a good reason to start with that and actually put those mechanics in now, before I actually fully move into Chapter 2. So that might be part of what I do this December. So the plan right now for the Milestone is 4 months working on Chapter 2. That's double the amount of months that I had to work on Chapter 1. Now, part of why it's really supposed to be like 3 months, but December is kind of counted as like a half month, because obviously in the second half of December, you don't tend to do a lot of work on that. So it's really like 3 months and a half-ish. So yeah, I was thinking basically I could spend sort of the half month of December here. Just basically addressing the issues that were brought up in playtesting. And setting up all the stuff related to factions in Chapter 1. And also probably starting to work on the actual factions as they also work in Chapter 2. I could also work on stuff that is set up in Chapter 1, but that happens in Chapter 2. Like all things related to characters you recruit, right? Like, for instance, whatever things might happen with Donovan, or with Mallory, or with Leslie, right? All these characters that join you in Chapter 1, and that kind of are meant to have some mechanics that happen in Chapter 2, or at least maybe late in Chapter 1 if you've been exploring Chapter 1 thoroughly. So I might work on that too, just like these things that are set up early and then happen late. I might also work on Jack, the I'm not actually sure how to pronounce their name there, but the little imp that you find in a bottle. Technically, you can buy Jack the familiar, the little imp, in Chapter 1, but it's really more of a Chapter 2 thing, because the price for buying them is so absurd for Chapter 1 that I don't expect anyone's going to be able to actually spend. It's like 900 gold, I think. 900 gold is a lot of gold for Chapter 1. So yeah, I kind of expect most people are gonna need to are really only gonna be able to get them for Chapter 2. Yeah, if you explore a lot, you might be able to, but that's like I said. So I think I might also work on Jack a little bit, for basically all of the mechanics regarding their contract. So Jack is a little familiar that can join your party as your familiar, and has a bunch of little mechanics in the contract that you have to sign. The familiarship contract. And all these little clauses have little things that they should do, but none of them are really implemented yet. Also, Helen, obviously, has some shit that needs to go down if you recruit her. I'd like to have something happen with Levitt as well. Levitt definitely needs some sort of quest in Chapter 2. Because, Levitt is going to be one of the most common NPCs people recruit. So giving Levitt some content in the mid-game is a good idea. So something... Also, Chapter 2 is kind of like the last chance to have very widely available content for characters you recruit, because once you reach chapter 3, since there's 3 different ways to go through chapter 3, any quest that you get from characters in chapter 1, if they tie into a specific one of those 3 wings of chapter 3, then you're just going to miss it 2 out of 3 times, right? So that sucks. So chapter 2 is really the best time to have a lot of those quests happen or resolve, right? Unless you're told right from the start, right? So there might be characters that have specific things to do in the graveyard or in the university and so on. Like Leslie probably is going to push you towards the university, right? That makes sense. Although I don't know, she might have something to do in the graveyard too. Who knows? But yeah, so I need to be careful about. It's really best if things happen in chapter 2, because that's like the last time for a while that all of the paths are sort of together in one. And after that, it splits, and then becomes a lot easier to miss out on stuff if it ties into your characters you recruited. So yeah. So yeah, that's something to think about. So definitely a lot of quests on NPCs need to happen in chapter 2. But yeah. So yeah, that's the road ahead. So that's what I think I'll do for the rest of for December. I'm gonna be solving all the bugs that, like I said, they found a few dozen bugs, and I've addressed about half of them so far. And yeah, I need to just address the other half, and that's probably gonna take just a few days. And after that, I need to get to work on all of the sort of setup work for the factions. And yeah, there's several factions. There's quite a bit. They're not all introduced in chapter 1. Only like 4 or 5 of the factions really are things you could join in chapter 1. So it's about half of them, I guess. About half the factions. The other half really are only introduced in chapter 2 and beyond. Yeah, let me see. There's this, there's that, yeah. Technically 5. Yeah, I guess technically 5 of the factions would be something that you kind of interact with in chapter 1 and might even join fully in chapter 1. Yeah. Well. Also, there is one faction that's very specific to one segment of chapter 3. So that's a whole thing. The middle segment, the arena, that has it's very much tied to one specific faction. And I'm not even sure it's the Sobek faction, the crocodile god. And that's actually one where I'm not sure how much I want that faction to spread out of the arena. It would be interesting to have some setup outside of it. Especially since any faction you can only join after chapter 2 is going to be missed by most people, because most people are going to already have a faction by that point. So it's probably best if there's at least some little bits and hints about how there's one faction you're missing that you're going to have an opportunity for if you hold out for it. So yeah, I'll need to think about that. But yeah, that's it. That's the general plan. Yeah. Oh, that was a bit more of a meaty update. That was like 2 hours almost. So yeah, that was last week, and also the plan for the coming month. So I'm gonna take a short little break. And I think I'm going to continue playing King's Field tonight. Yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with that. Yeah, been having quite a bit of fun with King's Field. So yeah, I'll take a little break. I'll stop the stream. And in 10 minutes, I'll start a new stream to play Kingsfield. So, if that sounds interesting to you, I guess stick around, and otherwise, take care.